Millionaire William Hart stood in the middle of the luxurious jewelry store, surrounded by the sparkle of diamonds and precious gemstones. He hadn't come here with the intention of buying anything, but he couldn't resist the opportunity to see the latest arrivals. Even the wealthy sometimes found pleasure in merely admiring the magnificence of items they could afford. His gaze was drawn to a display case at the far end of the room, where the gleaming jewels beckoned to him. As he approached, William's heart began to race. Resting on a bed of black velvet was a pendant, one that looked exactly like the one he had given to his daughter, Emily, on her 16th birthday. He had purchased it in Paris, a rare piece with an intricate design, unlike any other. A delicate gold chain held a small, heart-shaped locket studded with sapphires and a single diamond at its center. He could never mistake it. This was the very pendant Emily had worn every day until she disappeared 3 years ago. Emily's disappearance had been the most devastating event of William's life. She had gone missing without a trace, one ordinary summer evening, and no amount of money or influence could bring her back. Despite a massive search effort, private investigators, and countless sleepless nights, the case had gone cold. Not a single clue had emerged to explain what had happened to her. Yet now, here was the pendant, a tangible reminder of his daughter, sitting openly in this high-end store. A chill ran down William's spine. How did it get here? Was it possible that the pendant had changed hands so many times in the past 3 years, circulating through different owners, eventually ending up here? Or was it a clue, an indication that Emily was still alive somewhere? He needed answers, and he needed them now. He turned to the store manager, an elegantly dressed woman with a calm demeanor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This pendant, where did it come from?" The manager gave him a polite smile. "Oh, that's quite a unique piece, isn't it? Came to us just last week through an auction house in Geneva. It's part of an estate sale from a private collector." William's mind raced. An estate sale? That meant the pendant had belonged to someone recently deceased. Could that person have known something about Emily, or had they simply found the pendant somewhere, not knowing its true significance? "I'd like to buy it," he said quickly, "no matter the price." The manager raised an eyebrow, sensing the urgency in his tone. "Of course, sir. I'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. But may I ask, does this piece hold a special significance for you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it belonged to my daughter, who went missing 3 years ago." The manager's expression softened. "I see. I can imagine how important this is to you. While we prepare the purchase, I can provide the contact information for the auction house. They might have more details about the item's provenance." William thanked her and took a seat in the store's private lounge, feeling a mix of hope and dread. As he waited, memories of Emily flooded his mind. Her infectious laughter, her love for the arts, the way she would sit in the garden and paint for hours. That pendant had been a symbol of his love for her, and it seemed unthinkable that it would appear now, so long after she had vanished. With the purchase complete and the auction house's contact details in hand, William wasted no time. He flew to Geneva the very next day, arranging a meeting with a representative who had handled the estate sale. The auction house was an old, prestigious institution, known for its discretion and dealing with high-value items. The representative, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a practiced air of professionalism, greeted William in a tastefully decorated office. "Mr. Hart, it's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you're interested in learning more about a pendant that recently passed through our auction." "Yes," William said, setting the pendant on the table between them. "I need to know where it came from." The man studied the pendant for a moment before speaking. This piece was part of an estate sale belonging to a Mr. Anton Lassalle. He was a well-known collector of rare and unusual items, though not much is known about how he acquired many of them. He passed away earlier this year, and his collection was put up for auction. The name didn't ring a bell for William, but that didn't matter. Did Mr. Lassalle ever mention where he obtained the pendant? Or did he have any connection to my daughter, Emily Hart? The representative frowned thoughtfully. There isn't much in our records about that particular item, I'm afraid. However, Mr. LaSalle was known to travel extensively and had connections with many private dealers. If you like, I could arrange for you to speak with his former assistant, who might know more. William agreed, and within a few hours, he was sitting across from LaSalle's former assistant, a young woman named Isabel. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw the pendant. "I remember this," she said softly. "Mr. LaSalle had it in his private collection. He was very secretive about some of his acquisitions, but I do recall him mentioning that he obtained this pendant under unusual circumstances." William leaned forward. "What do you mean by unusual circumstances?" Isabel hesitated. "He didn't say much, only that he acquired it from a private dealer in Eastern Europe. It was about 2 years ago, I think. He mentioned that it came with a story, something about it being found in an abandoned cabin in the Carpathian Mountains. There was talk of strange occurrences, though Mr. LaSalle was never one to believe in superstitions. The mention of the Carpathian Mountains sent a shiver down William's spine. The place had a dark history, with tales of people going missing in the dense forests, never to be seen again. Could Emily have ended up there somehow? If so, what could have led her to such a remote and dangerous place? Desperate for more information, William decided to follow this lead. He set out for Eastern Europe, driven by a faint glimmer of hope that had ignited within him. He would find the private dealer who had sold the pendant to LaSalle. If Emily had indeed been in that cabin, then there might be clues left behind that could point him in the right direction. The journey took him deep into the heart of the Carpathian region, where the landscapes were wild and untamed. William's search led him to a small village nestled in the foothills, where locals whispered of the cabin in question. It was a place few dared to go, said to be cursed or haunted by the spirits of those who had perished there. William wasn't deterred. He hired a local guide who knew the area well and set off towards the cabin. The trail was steep and treacherous, winding through dense forests that seemed to close in around them. After several hours of hiking, they finally reached the place. A dilapidated wooden structure, its roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. As he searched the cabin, William's flashlight illuminated faded photographs, old books, and other remnants of a life once lived there. Then, in a small drawer near the back of the room, he found something that made his breath catch. A sketchbook. The cover was worn, and as he opened it, his heart began to pound in his chest. The drawings inside were unmistakable: landscapes, animals, and portraits done in Emily's distinctive style. There were sketches of the forest, the cabin itself, and even a self-portrait, her familiar signature scrawled at the bottom. Emily had been here. There was no doubt about it. But why had she come, and where had she gone? As William continued to flip through the pages, he found the last drawing in the book. A map. It was rough and hastily drawn, but it showed a trail leading deeper into the mountains, ending at a place marked only as the sanctuary. His resolve strengthened. William knew he had to find this sanctuary, no matter what awaited him there. It was his only chance to uncover the truth about his daughter's fate. William and his guide ventured deeper into the Carpathian wilderness, following the rough map from Emily's sketchbook. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with steep ravines and dense thickets that seemed to swallow the light. Hours turned into days as they pressed on, their progress slowed by harsh weather and the rugged landscape. But William was relentless. If Emily had been able to make this journey, then so could he. The trail was almost non-existent at times, and the further they traveled, the more signs they found that they were entering a place untouched by time. They came across ancient stone markers covered in moss and strange symbols that William didn't recognize. His guide, a local named Andre, grew more nervous with each step. "These symbols, they are old," Andre muttered, glancing around as if expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. "The stories say they mark the boundaries of forbidden lands, places where no one should go." William's patience was wearing thin. "I didn't come all this way for ghost stories. If there's any danger ahead, we'll deal with it. Let's keep moving." Andre hesitated but nodded, leading William further into the mountains. After another day's trek, they finally reached the location marked on Emily's map, the sanctuary. The place was unlike anything William had ever seen. It was an ancient ruin, half buried in the mountainside, with tall stone pillars surrounding a central courtyard. Vines and roots had claimed much of the structure, but the architecture hinted at a once sacred purpose, perhaps a forgotten temple or monastery. In the middle of the courtyard stood a massive stone altar, its surface etched with the same strange symbols they had seen along the way. William's eyes were drawn to a small alcove behind the altar, where something glinted faintly in the dim light. As he approached, he saw a silver locket, identical to the one Emily always wore, lying on the ground. He picked it up, his hands trembling as he opened the locket. Inside was a small photograph of Emily, smiling at the camera. This was hers, there was no doubt. He turned to Andre. "She was here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But where did she go from here?" Andre looked uneasy. "I don't know, Mr. Hart. The stories about this place. They say it was a site of ancient rituals. People came here seeking something, power, immortality, perhaps even otherworldly knowledge. But many never returned." William wasn't interested in local legends. He scoured the sanctuary for more clues, searching every crevice and hidden chamber. As dusk fell, he finally discovered a passageway leading underground. The entrance was partially collapsed, with debris blocking most of the path, but there was just enough space for a person to squeeze through. "Help me clear this," William said, but Andre took a step back. "No, sir. I will go no further," he replied, his face pale. "There are places where even the bravest do not tread." William didn't waste time trying to convince him. He crawled through the narrow gap, his determination pushing him forward. The passage opened into a dark tunnel that seemed to stretch endlessly into the earth. The air was damp and cold, and the silence was suffocating. But as he ventured deeper, William noticed something strange. Faint carvings on the walls, depicting scenes of people gathered around the altar, performing rituals. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the mountain's heart. After what felt like hours, he emerged into a vast underground chamber. It was an enormous cavern, illuminated by a soft, unnatural glow emanating from strange crystals embedded in the walls. At the far end of the chamber, a massive stone doorway stood, its surface covered in ancient script and symbols. The doorway seemed sealed, with no visible means of opening it. William approached cautiously, studying the symbols. They looked familiar, like the ones on the markers and at the sanctuary. As he reached out to touch the doorway, the air around him seemed to shift, and he felt a sudden dizziness wash over him. The symbols began to glow faintly under his fingers, as if responding to his touch. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the cavern. A voice he hadn't heard in years. "Dad!" William spun around, his heart pounding. Standing at the edge of the cavern was Emily, or at least a figure that looked like her. She was pale and thin, wearing a tattered cloak, her eyes filled with a mixture of recognition and fear. "Emily!" he cried, rushing towards her. "Is it really you? What happened?" She took a step back, her expression conflicted. I didn't expect you to find me here. You shouldn't have come." "What do you mean?" William demanded, desperate to close the distance between them. "I've been searching for you for 3 years. Where have you been?" Her gaze flickered towards the stone doorway. "I was trapped," she said quietly. "Or rather, I was drawn here. The pendant was the key. It led me to this place, but once I entered, I couldn't leave. There's something here, something ancient. It doesn't want to let us go." William felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? We can leave right now. I'll get you out of here." But Emily shook her head. "It's not that simple. There are rules. The entity that resides here, it demands something in return for passage. Those who enter must offer a sacrifice, or they remain bound to this place forever." William's mind reeled. Was this some kind of twisted folklore? Or had Emily truly encountered something beyond human understanding? He wasn't about to lose her again. Then we'll find a way to break these rules. I'm not leaving without you. Emily looked at him with a sadness that tore at his heart. You don't understand. The sacrifice has already been made. And I was the one who chose it. Before William could respond, the cavern began to tremble, and a deep rumbling filled the air. The glowing crystals pulsed with a sinister light, and the stone doorway behind Emily started to shift. The ancient symbols blazed with an intensity that made him shield his eyes. When the rumbling subsided, Emily was standing in front of the now open doorway. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I had to choose, or I would have never found the strength to keep going. I made the choice to protect you. And then, without another word, she stepped through the doorway. It began to seal itself shut as William rushed forward, desperately trying to reach her. He screamed her name, but the doorway closed with a final, deafening thud, and Emily was gone. William fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the emptiness that filled the cavern. The pendant in his pocket seemed to grow colder, as if all the warmth had been drained from it. He had come so close, only to lose her again to forces he could not comprehend. As he stumbled back towards the entrance of the cavern, William realized that the pendant still glowed faintly, its light guiding him through the darkness. It was a cruel reminder that even in the most desperate of searches, some mysteries remained unsolvable. William emerged from the cavern, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The cold mountain air hit him like a wall, but it did nothing to clear the fog of despair and confusion that had settled over him. Emily had been right there, within reach, and then gone again. Was it even real, or had the darkness of the underground chamber played tricks on his mind? But the pendant's persistent glow told him otherwise. Something had indeed happened, and Emily had been a part of it. When he found Andre waiting anxiously near the collapsed entrance, the guide's expression turned to one of concern. Mr. Hart, you look as if you've seen a ghost. Did you find what you were looking for? William shook his head slowly. Yes and no. She was here, Andre. I saw her, or something that looked like her. She spoke to me, told me that something ancient is keeping her in this place. I failed to get her out. The guide's face darkened. I warned you, sir. There are forces in these mountains that do not belong to our world. If she is indeed trapped by something ancient, then freeing her may require more than mere courage or persistence. There are rituals, knowledge passed down from times long forgotten. William seized on Andre's words with sudden desperation. Then tell me, whatever these rituals are, I need to know. I need to understand how to bring her back. Andre hesitated, clearly reluctant to involve himself further, but at the sight of William's despair, he finally relented. There is an old woman in the village. Some call her a witch, others call her a healer. She knows the old ways. If anyone can tell you how to deal with ancient powers, it would be her. It was a faint hope, but at this point, William was willing to grasp at any straw. He and Andre made the arduous trek back to the village, their journey marked by a tense silence. When they arrived, it was already nightfall, and the village seemed eerily quiet. Andre led him to a small, secluded cottage at the edge of the settlement. The house was dimly lit, and the scent of herbs and burning incense drifted through the air. The old woman, who introduced herself as Vanya, greeted them at the door. She had sharp, knowing eyes that seemed to pierce right through William. I know why you've come, she said before either of them could speak. The mountain spirits have whispered of your arrival. You seek to bring back someone taken by the sanctuary. William's hope flickered into cautious optimism. Yes, my daughter Emily. She's trapped by something ancient that dwells in the mountains. I need to know how to free her. Vanya motioned for them to enter, and they sat around a small table cluttered with jars, scrolls, and candles. The sanctuary is not a place like any other, she began. It is a threshold, a place where our world touches another, a realm where the rules of reality do not apply as they do here. Those who enter it are bound by its laws older than humankind itself. William leaned forward, desperate for answers. But there must be a way. She mentioned a sacrifice, What does that mean? Vanya nodded gravely. The sanctuary requires a price. The pendant you found, it is a key of sorts, a tool for opening the passage. But using it exacts a toll. To free someone from the other side, you must offer something of equal value, something dear to you, or even part of yourself. William felt a chill settle over him. Part of myself? What are you saying? The sacrifice can be many things, Vanya explained, her voice low and steady. Memories, years of your life, even a piece of your soul. The greater the love and connection, the higher the price that must be paid. But beware, if you do not meet the sanctuary's demands, it will take more than what you are willing to offer. The idea of giving up part of himself to save Emily was both terrifying and strangely liberating. He would do anything, give up anything, to bring her back. Tell me what I need to do, he said with grim determination. If it's a ritual, if there's something I must give, I'll do it. Vanya took a deep breath and began to gather various items from around the room. Candles, a small knife, a bowl, and a bundle of herbs. The ritual must be performed at the sanctuary itself, she said, as she carefully placed each item into a leather bag. You must return there alone. The pendant will guide you once again to the doorway. When you stand before it, you will perform the ritual and make your offering. But understand this, once you begin, there will be no turning back. The forces at play will not release you until a price has been paid. With the ritual instructions committed to memory and Vanya's warnings echoing in his mind, William returned to the sanctuary. He made the journey alone this time, pushing himself to the limit to reach the ancient site before nightfall. The mountains seemed even more foreboding than before, as if aware of the purpose for which he had returned. When he arrived at the sanctuary, the ruins were bathed in the silver glow of the moon. He stood before the stone altar, his breath visible in the chill night air. The pendant's glow brightened as he approached the sealed doorway, as if it sensed the ritual was about to begin. William set up the candles around the doorway and lit them, their flames flickering in the night breeze. He took the knife and made a shallow cut on his palm, letting a few drops of blood fall into the bowl. As Vanya had instructed, he mixed the blood with the herbs and chanted the ancient words she had taught him, his voice trembling with both fear and resolve. The pendant's glow intensified, and the symbols on the doorway began to radiate with an otherworldly light once more. William felt a sudden pressure, a weight on his chest, as if the very air around him was thickening. He closed his eyes and concentrated on his offering, pouring every ounce of his love for Emily into the ritual. I give of myself, he whispered, feeling a coldness seep into his veins. I offer my years, my time, for my daughter's life. The words seemed to resonate, echoing through the sanctuary like a thunderclap. The light from the pendant flared, and the doorway began to shift, the stone moving aside as though granting him passage. As it opened, William felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something deep inside him was being torn away. His legs weakened, and he nearly collapsed, but he forced himself to stay upright, knowing that Emily's freedom depended on his strength. The doorway revealed a dark tunnel, not unlike the one he had traversed before, but this time, he could sense a presence waiting at the other end. He staggered forward, driven by sheer willpower, until he emerged into another chamber. There, in the faint glow of the crystalline walls, stood Emily. But something was different about her. She seemed older, her eyes filled with a wisdom and sadness that hadn't been there before. William reached out to her, his vision blurring as exhaustion began to overtake him. Emily, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You're free. We can go home now. Emily stepped closer, her expression bittersweet. Dad, you shouldn't have come. I'm so sorry. Before William could ask what she meant, the chamber trembled, and a deep, resonant voice filled the air. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, as if the mountain itself was speaking. The price has been paid, the voice intoned. One life exchanged for another. The realization hit William like a hammer blow. He had offered his time, his years, but he hadn't understood the true cost. The sanctuary had taken more than he intended, It had taken his place in the world. His strength faded rapidly, and he felt himself slipping away, the darkness closing in. The last thing he saw was Emily's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "I love you, Dad." And then the world went black. When William woke again, he was lying on the cold ground outside the sanctuary. The doorway was sealed shut, and the pendant lay beside him, its glow completely extinguished. He was alive, but something had changed. He felt weak and frail, as if years had been stolen from him. In his heart, he knew he had succeeded in freeing Emily, but at a cost he hadn't fully comprehended. He looked towards the mountain, where the sanctuary loomed silently, its secrets buried once more. The pendant lay cold in his hand, a reminder of the sacrifice he had made. And though he had saved his daughter, he couldn't shake the feeling that a part of him was still bound to that ancient place, a price paid to powers far beyond human understanding. William lay on the cold ground for what felt like hours, struggling to gather his strength. Every movement was labored, and each breath seemed to sap the little energy he had left. The sanctuary's secrets had taken their toll on him, and the weight of his actions settled heavily on his chest. Emily was free, but he had paid a terrible price. He felt the years stolen from him. His hands trembled with a weakness he had never known, and his once strong frame now felt frail, as if he had aged decades in a single night. Eventually, he forced himself to his feet, clutching the extinguished pendant. He began the slow trek back down the mountain, his steps unsteady. As he walked, a strange thought entered his mind. What if Emily was not truly free? What if the sanctuary had deceived him, allowing only a shadow of his daughter to return while keeping a part of her trapped in its dark embrace? The thought gnawed at him, deepening his sense of despair. Returning to the village, William collapsed from exhaustion just outside Vanya's cottage. The old woman came out to find him lying in the dirt, pale and trembling. She and André quickly carried him inside, where they laid him on a small cot near the fire. When William finally regained consciousness, he saw Vanya sitting beside him, her expression one of grim understanding. "You survived," she said softly. "But you are not the man who left this village a few days ago." William tried to speak, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Emily, is she truly free?" Vanya's gaze was piercing, as though she could see straight through to his soul. "The price you paid was indeed accepted. Your daughter is free to walk the earth again, but freedom from the sanctuary is not always without consequences. When one escapes its grasp, they do not return unchanged." William felt a cold dread seeping into his bones. "What do you mean?" he asked, struggling to push himself upright. "She may appear as she did before," Vanya replied, her tone measured. "But the sanctuary leaves a mark on those who pass through its doors. The place where she was bound is not easily forgotten, and it may yet hold some sway over her. The cost was high, and its reach does not simply end because you were willing to sacrifice for her freedom." William's heart sank. He had imagined reuniting with Emily, seeing her smile again and feeling her embrace. But now there was a shadow cast over that hope. He needed to see her, to know if she was truly the daughter he had lost or something else entirely. Despite his weakened state, he resolved to return to his home in London, where he would find her waiting. The journey back took longer than it should have, as William's strength ebbed with each passing day. By the time he arrived at his mansion, he was nearly unrecognizable, a gaunt figure of his former self. But the sight that awaited him renewed his spirit, if only for a moment. Emily was there, standing in the entryway as if she had never left. She rushed to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "Dad!" she cried, embracing him tightly. "I thought I'd never see you again. How did you?" William held her close, his heart swelling with relief and love. "I found you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I did what I had to do." For a time, it seemed as though their lives might finally return to some semblance of normalcy. William cherished every moment with Emily, feeling as though he had been given a second chance. But it wasn't long before he began to notice subtle changes in her. Small things at first, like the way she would sometimes stare into the distance, her eyes unfocused, or how she seemed unusually cold to the touch. She would often wake from sleep in a state of agitation, unable to recall what had disturbed her dreams. Weeks passed, and Emily's condition did not improve. If anything, it worsened. She began to speak in her sleep, muttering strange words in an unfamiliar language. Her moods became unpredictable, swinging from joyful and bright to withdrawn and sullen within a matter of hours. And there were times when William thought he saw a flicker of something else in her eyes, something not entirely human. Desperate to help her, William contacted numerous doctors and specialists, none of whom could find anything physically wrong with Emily. The more they probed, the more elusive the problem seemed to become. Eventually, William sought out Vanya again, writing to her with a plea for further guidance. The old woman's reply was concise and disturbing. The sanctuary's mark remains. The ties to that place must be severed completely, or it will pull her back. You must return what was borrowed. William did not understand what she meant at first, but as Emily's condition continued to deteriorate, it became clear that the bond to the sanctuary was not broken. The place had not given her up so easily. It still sought to reclaim what was its own. Vanya's cryptic words haunted him. You must return what was borrowed. One night, as Emily sat in her room staring out the window, William entered quietly and sat beside her. Emily, he began, choosing his words carefully, I need you to tell me about the sanctuary. Do you remember anything from your time there? She turned to look at him, her eyes seeming far away. It's hard to explain, she said softly. It was like a dream and a nightmare. There were voices, shadows, and a sense of something watching me, always watching. I wanted to escape, but part of me felt drawn to it, like I belonged there. William's heart ached as he listened. Do you feel it even now? Is it still trying to call you back? She nodded slowly, her expression one of deep sorrow. Sometimes I hear it, whispering. It's like it's inside me, and I can't make it stop. The realization hit William with full force. The sanctuary's mark was not just on Emily. It was in her. She had been changed by that place, and unless the connection was severed, it would continue to haunt her, or worse, draw her back entirely. There was only one choice left, though it filled him with dread. He had to return to the sanctuary once more, not to reclaim Emily, but to give back what the place had left in her. He explained his plan to Vanya, who warned him that this time, the sanctuary would not be so willing to let him leave unscathed. It had already taken years from him, and if he tried to break its hold on Emily, it would demand something more than just a piece of his life. It would demand something deeper, his very essence. Despite the danger, William returned to the mountains. His body was frail, and his mind felt the weight of all that had transpired, but his resolve remained unbroken. He reached the sanctuary one last time, carrying the pendant and a deep sense of finality. Standing before the stone doorway, he performed the ritual again, using the last of his strength to call out to the ancient powers that resided there. He made his final offering. Not his years, not his blood, but his very soul, to sever the bond that connected Emily to this place. The doorway opened one final time, and a cold wind surged from within, wrapping around William as if in response to his sacrifice. The air crackled with energy, and the darkness beyond the threshold seemed to reach out, drawing him in. He felt his consciousness slipping away, but as the last light faded from his eyes, he knew that Emily would be free. The sanctuary took him, claiming what was promised, and the doorway sealed itself shut. The pendant lay on the ground, its glow now extinguished forever. Back in London, Emily awoke with a start. She felt different, as though a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. The whispers in her mind were gone, and for the first time since her return, she felt truly at peace. But when she went to find her father, he was nowhere to be found. Only a letter remained, written in his familiar hand. My dearest Emily, I have given everything for you. Live well, my daughter. Be free. And so, Emily was left to carry on, her father's sacrifice forever etched in her heart. She never spoke of the sanctuary again, but in the quiet moments of the night, she would sometimes gaze at the pendant and wonder about the price of freedom and the love that had saved her. Years passed, and life gradually returned to some semblance of normalcy for Emily. The horrors of the sanctuary became little more than a dark and distant memory, one she tried to bury with each passing day. Yet, despite her best efforts to move forward, a lingering emptiness remained, a void where her father's presence had once filled her world. She tried to fill that emptiness by immersing herself in work, charity projects, and even the arts, but nothing could truly mend the scars left by the past. She kept the pendant close, though she had never worn it again after her father's sacrifice. It sat on her nightstand, a silent reminder of what he had done for her, a symbol of love and loss intertwined. Some nights, she would find herself staring at it, half expecting it to start glowing again, as if it might open some new passage to where her father now dwelled. But it remained cold and still, its power seemingly exhausted. One evening, as she was sorting through some of her father's old papers, documents and personal notes he had left behind, Emily came across a leather-bound journal. It was worn and faded, with pages filled in William's familiar handwriting. Flipping through it, she realized that it was a record of his thoughts, fears, and experiences from the time he began searching for her until the moment he found her in the sanctuary. The journal detailed the journey in agonizing clarity, his encounters with Vanya, the ritual sacrifices, the strange occurrences in the mountains, and the toll it had taken on his body and mind. But then, towards the end of the journal, she found entries that were different from the rest, almost as though they were not written by her father at all. The handwriting was his, yet the words seemed distant, detached, as though something else had taken over his thoughts. The entries spoke of dreams and visions, of the ancient powers residing in the sanctuary, and a deep yearning to understand the source of its strength. There was one passage that particularly unsettled her. The sanctuary is not merely a place. It is a living thing, a consciousness that feeds on the essence of those who come near. It absorbs the hopes, fears, and sacrifices offered at its threshold. What I believed to be a ritual to save my daughter was not only about setting her free. It was also about binding myself to something far older and far more powerful than I can comprehend. I wonder now if I have given it more than I intended, if it has claimed a part of me, and through that, will forever be linked to Emily. Emily closed the journal, her heart racing. Could it be possible that her father's sacrifice had not truly severed the connection between her and the sanctuary? Had his final act not only freed her, but also created a lingering link that she had not yet fully understood? She decided she needed answers, ones that the old journal could not provide. There was only one person who might know the truth, who had always seemed to understand the darkness that surrounded the sanctuary: Vanya. Though years had passed, Emily still remembered where the old woman's cottage lay, in that remote Carpathian village. Driven by a sense of unfinished business, Emily embarked on a journey to find Vanya once more. The village had not changed much, still a quiet, forgotten place nestled at the edge of the mountains. When Emily reached Vanya's cottage, she hesitated before knocking, a deep unease settling over her. The door creaked open, and there stood Vanya, aged but no less sharp-eyed than Emily remembered. "I knew you would come one day," Vanya said, as if expecting her. She stepped aside, motioning for Emily to enter. It was only a matter of time. Emily took a seat by the fire, the warmth doing little to ease the chill in her bones. "I found my father's journal," she began, her voice steady despite the anxiety that gripped her. "He wrote about the sanctuary, and something about being bound to it even after his sacrifice. Is there still a connection?" Vanya sighed, her expression a mixture of pity and resignation. "The sanctuary does not let go easily," she said, stirring the embers in the hearth. "What your father gave was enough to release you from its grip, but it did not sever all ties. When a life is offered, it becomes part of the sanctuary's fabric. That place now holds a piece of him, and through that piece, it may still reach out to you." Emily's heart sank. So, It isn't over? Can still call to me? The old woman nodded. Yes, but there are ways to protect yourself. You must understand that the sanctuary draws its power from those who acknowledge it, those who accept its existence and succumb to its call. You have a choice. Live your life free from its influence by refusing to heed it, or confront it once more, but this time with knowledge and preparation. Emily shivered at the thought of returning to that cursed place. But if it's still connected to me, can it harm me from afar? It can manifest in subtle ways, Vanya explained. In dreams, in moments of weakness, even in the quiet, unguarded thoughts of your mind. If you are not vigilant, it can use that connection to draw you back in, to tempt you to return willingly. Emily was silent for a long time, staring into the flickering flames. Is there no way to break this connection completely? She finally asked, her voice trembling with both hope and fear. There is a way, Vanya replied, her tone darkening. But it is dangerous. To sever the bond, you would have to confront the source of the sanctuary's power directly. The heart of it lies deep within the mountains, far below the ruins you know. There is a place where the fabric of reality is thinnest, where the ancient consciousness dwells. If you could reach that place and perform a ritual of separation, you might break the connection. But be warned, the cost may be even higher than what your father paid. The thought of returning to the sanctuary, of descending into its very depths, filled Emily with dread. Yet she could not live her life under its shadow. She needed to be free, not just for herself, but to honor the memory of her father's sacrifice. Tell me what I need to do, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Vanya's eyes glinted with a mixture of sadness and respect. Very well, she said. But remember, once you begin, there will be no turning back. Over the next few days, Vanya taught Emily the rites she would need to perform and the tools she would need to carry. The ritual of separation would require more than blood or sacrifice. It would require the full strength of her will and the courage to confront the ancient consciousness that resided at the heart of the sanctuary. Vanya gave Emily a talisman, an amulet that had been passed down through generations of the village's healers, said to protect its wearer from the spirits that dwelled in the mountains. With the old woman's guidance, Emily made her preparations and then set out for the sanctuary once more. This time not as a lost girl seeking escape, but as a determined woman ready to reclaim her fate. The journey felt different this time. She did not bring fear with her, only resolve. The path to the sanctuary was familiar yet changed, as if the land itself sensed her purpose. She reached the ruins and stood before the ancient stone altar where her father had once stood. The air was thick with the same unsettling energy, but she pressed on, finding the hidden entrance that led down to the deeper levels of the mountains. The descent was long and treacherous, the darkness more profound than she had remembered. Yet, as she ventured further, she felt the talisman grow warm against her skin, its protective power offering a faint comfort in the oppressive gloom. The tunnels twisted and turned, leading her ever deeper into the earth until she finally reached a vast, cavernous chamber. It was like the belly of a great beast, with jagged crystal formations glowing faintly along the walls and an ancient stone platform at its center. Emily approached the platform and began the ritual. She lit the candles, drew the symbols of separation with chalk, and recited the incantations Vanya had taught her. As the last word left her lips, the air seemed to shift, and a deep, resonant vibration filled the chamber. The crystals along the walls began to pulse with an eerie light, and a voice echoed in her mind, a voice that was not her own. You return, but not to reclaim. You come to sever what cannot be undone. The voice was ancient, carrying a weight of time beyond comprehension. It seemed to reach into the very core of her being, as if searching for something it could use against her. I will not be bound, Emily shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. I reject your hold over me. The chamber trembled, and a dark, formless shape emerged from the shadows, swirling above the stone platform. It was as if the very essence of the sanctuary had manifested before her. The air grew cold, and the light from the crystals flickered. Emily felt a terrible pressure building, pushing against her mind, threatening to crush her will. But she clutched the talisman, focusing all her strength into the final words of the ritual. As she spoke, the talisman grew hot, the warmth spreading through her body, giving her the strength to resist the darkness. She cast the talisman onto the stone platform, where it shattered into pieces, releasing a blinding flash of light. The darkness recoiled, and a great roar echoed through the chamber as the connection between her and the sanctuary was severed. The light grew brighter, enveloping Emily in its embrace. When it finally faded, the formless shape was gone, and the cavern was still. Emily collapsed onto the platform, exhausted but free. She felt the difference immediately. There was no lingering sense of dread, no whispers at the edge of her consciousness. The sanctuary's power over her was broken, and with it, the last remnants of its claim on her father's sacrifice. She had severed the bond, and now, at last, she was truly free. She left the mountains behind for the final time, carrying with her only the memory of what she had endured, and the knowledge that her father had saved her not once, but twice. The sanctuary was no longer a threat, just a dark chapter in a story that had finally come to an end. Emily returned to her life with a new sense of peace, knowing that whatever shadows remained, they were only memories, unable to harm her anymore. And though she kept the pieces of the shattered talisman as a reminder of the cost of freedom, she never spoke of the sanctuary again. The past was behind her, and for the first time in many years, she could finally look towards the future. In the years that followed, Emily rebuilt her life. She found herself traveling often, as if the freedom she had won compelled her to see the world beyond the confines of her past. She ventured to cities she had never visited before, explored places that spoke of mystery and history, and even sought out the kind of ancient ruins that once would have filled her with dread. With each new destination, she felt more alive. Yet there was always an unspoken shadow that lingered, a quiet part of her that still wondered if she had truly left everything behind. Emily found herself returning to the arts, resuming the painting she had abandoned before her disappearance. Her works took on a surreal quality, filled with vivid colors and dreamlike landscapes. Many of the pieces she produced seemed to depict strange, half-remembered visions, vast caverns, ancient stone ruins, and shadowy figures that seemed to blur the line between reality and imagination. Her art became a form of catharsis, a way to express the things she could not articulate with words. The pieces drew attention, and before long, Emily found herself the subject of curiosity and acclaim. Her art exhibitions attracted collectors and critics alike, many of whom praised the haunting, otherworldly atmosphere of her work. They called her style sublime and uncanny, though they had no way of knowing just how close her paintings came to the reality she had once faced. Despite her success, there were still moments when she felt a strange emptiness, as if some fragment of herself had been left behind in the sanctuary. Though she had performed the ritual to sever the connection, there were times when she would catch glimpses of something in her dreams, fleeting images of dark caverns or glowing crystals. She would awaken with a start, and though these dreams faded quickly, they left her unsettled. One evening, after one of her art exhibitions in Paris, Emily was approached by a man who stood out from the usual crowd of patrons. He was tall, with a scholarly look, and there was something in his eyes that suggested he knew more than he let on. He introduced himself as Dr. Adrien Lachance, an anthropologist who specialized in ancient folklore and ritual practices. "Your work is fascinating, Miss Hart," he said, gesturing to a large painting that depicted an otherworldly cavern with strange crystalline formations. "There's something about it that feels familiar." Emily was taken aback. "Familiar? It's just a painting. It comes from my imagination." Dr. Lachance gave a knowing smile. "I've spent years studying ancient sites and lost civilizations, places that have long been forgotten by the modern world. Your paintings, particularly this one, bear a striking resemblance to descriptions I've encountered in certain obscure texts. The sanctuary, for instance, is a place that some believe to exist not just as a physical location, but as a state of consciousness or an intersection of worlds." The mention of the sanctuary sent a jolt through Emily. She struggled to keep her composure. "You've heard of the sanctuary?" she asked, her voice barely hiding the tension. "I have," Dr. Lachance replied, his gaze steady and intense. "It's an old legend, one that appears in the folklore of various cultures. Different names, different stories, but the core remains the same. A place where our world touches something other, something beyond. There are accounts of people who've sought out the sanctuary, and of those who've returned changed, or never returned at all." Emily felt a chill creep up her spine. "And what do you think it is?" she asked, unable to keep the tremor out of her voice. The anthropologist considered her question for a moment. "I think it is a place of power, a place that reflects the innermost desires and fears of those who encounter it. Perhaps it is a doorway to another realm, or perhaps it is something far more abstract, a place where reality bends and shifts according to the will of the consciousnesses that touch it." Emily's mind raced. Could it be that there were others who had encountered the sanctuary, others who had experienced something similar to what she and her father had gone through? She had always believed her story to be uniquely tragic, but now it seemed there were more layers to this mystery than she had realized. "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked, her curiosity mixed with caution. "What do you want from me?" Dr. Lachance's expression softened. "I don't want anything from you, Miss Hart. I'm simply offering a possibility. If there's any truth to the idea that your paintings are not merely imaginative, but perhaps drawn from something deeper, something you've experienced, then you may hold answers that the world has been searching for. I'm not here to pry into your past, but if you are interested, I would be willing to share what I know, and perhaps together we could learn more about the nature of the sanctuary." Emily's initial instinct was to refuse. She had no desire to delve back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. But there was also a part of her that was tempted, a part that wondered if understanding more about the sanctuary could bring her the closure she never truly achieved. For years, she had tried to forget, but the presence of the sanctuary in her dreams and her art told her that forgetting was not the same as healing. After a long silence, she gave a slow nod. "All right, I'll listen to what you have to say." In the weeks that followed, Emily and Dr. Lachance met regularly, exchanging what they knew about the sanctuary. The anthropologist brought forth accounts from ancient texts and folklore, stories of lost explorers, shamanic rites, and cryptic references to gateways between worlds. Some of these accounts mirrored elements of Emily's own experience, while others were far stranger, describing encounters with beings that seemed neither human nor entirely otherworldly. Emily shared pieces of her own story, carefully omitting the most personal and painful details. She spoke of the pendant, the rituals, and the journey into the depths of the mountain, but not of her father's ultimate sacrifice. The more she learned, the more she felt a growing sense of unease. While it was clear that the sanctuary was a place of significance across different cultures, it was also apparent that there were forces within it that sought to manipulate those who entered. Forces that could use fear, longing, and even love as tools to bind their victims. Then, one day, Dr. Lachance presented Emily with something that took her by complete surprise. It was a photograph, old and faded, depicting a group of explorers standing before a large stone doorway carved into a mountainside. The symbols etched into the doorway's surface were unmistakable. They were the same ancient script she had seen at the sanctuary. "This photograph was taken over 100 years ago," Lachance explained. "The expedition was led by a man named Anton LaSalle, a renowned explorer of the time. He vanished along with most of his team during this journey. The few who returned spoke of strange occurrences in the mountains and of a place they called the Threshold, a place where time seemed to stand still." Emily's heart raced as she studied the photograph. "LaSalle," she murmured, recognizing the name. It was the same collector whose estate sale had brought her pendant to the jewelry store where her father first found it. "It seems the sanctuary's reach is long indeed," Lachance said, his voice low. "It has drawn many to it, across time and across continents. It has taken much from those who sought it, and it has left its mark on the world in ways most cannot see." Emily's mind swirled with questions. What had LaSalle and his team found? Had they encountered the same ancient consciousness that she and her father had faced? And if so, what had it taken from them? The photograph was more than just a relic of a long-forgotten expedition. It was a sign that the sanctuary was not done with her. Though she had severed her own bond with the place, its mysteries continued to ripple through time, touching lives in ways that defied explanation. She realized that if she were ever to truly understand the sanctuary and perhaps find a sense of final closure, she would have to confront its legacy, not just for herself, but for all the others who had crossed its threshold. Emily knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but this time, she would not face it as a frightened girl lost in the dark. She would face it as someone who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. As she set the photograph down, a quiet resolve filled her. The sanctuary had not claimed her completely. It had left a piece of her untouched, and she intended to use that piece to uncover its secrets once and for all. Emily's decision to pursue the truth about the sanctuary led her down a path she had never fully anticipated. The photograph of Anton LaSalle's expedition weighed heavily on her mind, as did the knowledge that others had encountered the sanctuary across different times and places. If she was to understand the true nature of that place, she needed to follow the threads connecting its history and the people who had fallen under its influence. She began to research LaSalle's life in earnest, digging through archives, museum collections, and historical societies. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that LaSalle had been an enigmatic figure. More than just an explorer, he was deeply interested in the occult and had participated in various esoteric societies that sought knowledge of the hidden and the unknown. His expedition to the Carpathians was one of his last ventures, and very little had been written about what he had hoped to find there. Among the few surviving documents from LaSalle's papers, Emily found a journal that had been donated to a museum collection in London. She arranged to see it, and as she held the old, leather-bound volume in her hands, a sense of eerie familiarity washed over her. The faded writing and worn pages seemed to carry the weight of secrets that had been buried for over a century. As she read through the journal, she was struck by how similar LaSalle's experiences were to her own. He wrote of strange dreams that had drawn him to the mountains, dreams that became more vivid and unsettling the closer he came to what he called the threshold. He described an ancient doorway, not unlike the one she had seen, covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change under the light. He mentioned a voice that spoke not in words but in feelings and impressions, as if reaching directly into his thoughts. LaSalle's journal took a darker turn as the entries neared the end. He spoke of losing members of his team, of some falling into madness, and others simply disappearing into the wilderness. His last entry was written in a shaky hand. "I am close now. Calls to me. Demands something I cannot understand. I fear I am no longer myself, but rather, something else is shaping me. If I do not return, let this journal be a warning. There is a place beyond, a place that consumes." Emily closed the journal, her hands trembling. It was clear that LaSalle had encountered the same ancient consciousness that she and her father had faced. The sanctuary had not just been a place. It had been an entity, an intelligence that sought to bind those who came near. LaSalle's fate seemed to echo her father's, though separated by decades, and it made Emily question whether her own struggle with the sanctuary had truly ended. The more she learned, the more Emily felt the pull to return to the Carpathians. There was a part of her that had never fully left that place, a part that still carried the weight of the sanctuary's darkness. She could feel its influence, subtle but persistent, like a distant hum at the back of her mind. It was as if the sanctuary was aware of her search, as if it was reaching out to her across the years. Emily confided in Dr. Lachance, sharing with him the details she had uncovered. He listened with a mix of fascination and concern. "If you're serious about going back," he said, "you'll need more than just determination. Whatever that place is, it doesn't play by the rules of the world we know. You saw what it did to LaSalle and his men." "I know," Emily replied, "but I also know that I can't let it continue to haunt me. There has to be a way to understand it, to confront it on my own terms. Maybe there's something I can do to close that chapter for good, not just for myself, but for everyone who has been affected by it." Dr. Lachance hesitated before speaking. There is one person who might be able to help. She's an old acquaintance of mine, a researcher in the field of parapsychology. Her name is Dr. Helena Kovacs, and she has done extensive work on anomalous places, sites that seem to bend the laws of physics and reality. If anyone could offer insight into what the sanctuary truly is, it would be her. Emily agreed to meet Dr. Kovacs, and arrangements were made for her to travel to Budapest, where the researcher maintained a small institute dedicated to the study of unexplained phenomena. When Emily arrived, she found Dr. Kovacs to be a serious woman in her 50s, with an air of intellectual intensity. Her eyes seemed to gleam with curiosity as Emily recounted her story and shared the details of LaSalle's journal. Dr. Kovacs listened intently, making notes as Emily spoke. "I have come across references to the sanctuary in my own research," she said finally. "Though under different names, it appears in folklore across several cultures, always described as a threshold, a place where worlds meet. There are accounts of individuals who have claimed to encounter entities within such places, entities that seem to exist outside of time and space as we understand it. Do you think it's possible that the sanctuary itself is alive in some way?" Emily asked. "That it's not just a place, but a consciousness?" "It's more than possible," Dr. Kovacs replied. "I believe the sanctuary could be what some refer to as a liminal entity. It's not a living being in the biological sense, but rather a form of sentient environment, a place that exerts a will or intent. It may not have a mind as we understand it, but it is capable of affecting those who enter, shaping their thoughts, memories, and even their fates." Emily shuddered. "If that's true, then how can I confront it? How can I make it let go?" Dr. Kovacs leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "There is an ancient ritual described in various occult texts, one that is said to banish or neutralize liminal entities. It involves invoking the entity's name, or more precisely, its true nature, and using that knowledge to disrupt its influence. If we can determine the sanctuary's essence, its name in this metaphysical sense, we might be able to sever its connection to you once and for all." "How do we find that name?" Emily asked, her hope mingled with fear. "We would need to conduct a deep exploration of the entity's manifestations, its symbols, and the experiences of those it has affected," Dr. Kovacs explained. "We would be looking for a pattern, a word or phrase that resonates with the entity's nature. It could be something hidden in LaSalle's journals, something within the folklore, or even something in your own memories." The idea of searching through her own memories for answers felt daunting, but Emily agreed to try. Over the next few weeks, she worked closely with Dr. Kovacs, delving into the journals, ancient texts, and her own recollections of the sanctuary. She underwent guided meditative sessions designed to unlock hidden memories and insights that could lead to the entity's true nature. During one such session, Emily experienced a vivid vision. She found herself back in the cavern deep beneath the sanctuary, standing before the glowing crystals that lined the walls. As she reached out to touch one, a word seemed to form in her mind, a word that felt ancient and powerful, resonating with the very fabric of the place. It was not a name in the traditional sense, but rather a concept, an expression of the entity's nature, Hespero, which seemed to mean the keeper of thresholds. Emily gasped as she emerged from the vision, the word still echoing in her mind. She shared the revelation with Dr. Kovacs, who believed they had found the key to confronting the entity. "If this word represents the entity's essence," she said, "then invoking it during the ritual could disrupt its influence and break its hold over you." The time had come for Emily to return to the Carpathians one last time. With Dr. Kovacs's guidance, she prepared for the ritual, carrying with her not only the tools for the ceremony but also a renewed determination. This time, she would not merely confront the sanctuary. She would confront Hespero, the force behind it, and demand her freedom. She returned to the ruins, descended once more into the depths of the mountain, and stood before the platform where she had severed the bond years ago. The air was thick with an ominous energy, as if the sanctuary sensed her purpose. She began the ritual, chanting the incantations that Dr. Kovacs had prepared for her. As she spoke the word Hespero, the cavern trembled, and the crystals glowed with a fierce light. A dark, swirling form emerged, much like the one she had seen before, but this time, she could feel its awareness, its recognition of her defiance. The air crackled with tension as the darkness seemed to recoil and then surge toward her. Emily did not waver. She repeated the word, her voice growing louder with each invocation. "Hespero," she cried. "You will release me. I claim my freedom, and I deny your hold over me." The darkness shuddered, and for a moment, Emily felt a terrible weight pressing down on her mind, as though the entity was resisting her will. But then, the pressure lifted, and the swirling form began to dissipate. The light from the crystals intensified, burning away the last vestiges of the darkness. Emily collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The cavern fell silent, and Emily knew that the bond had been truly broken. The sanctuary, or whatever entity lay at its heart, had been banished from her life. She felt a profound sense of relief, as if a heavy shroud had finally been lifted from her soul. She left the mountains for the final time, her steps lighter than they had ever been. The sanctuary was behind her, not as a place to fear but as a chapter finally closed. For the first time in many years, Emily was free, not just in body, but in spirit. The shadows that had haunted her were no more, and the future lay open before her, filled with endless possibilities. After returning from the Carpathians, Emily tried to settle back into a normal life, but she soon found that even with the sanctuary's influence finally severed, a lingering restlessness remained. The victory she had achieved had not come without a cost. She felt changed by the experience, as if the darkness she had confronted had left a permanent mark on her. Though she had succeeded in banishing the entity known as Hespero, she found herself questioning what it truly was and whether her battle had really brought an end to its reach. She threw herself back into her art, but her work took on an even more unsettling quality. The paintings she created now depicted not just the sanctuary, but other strange and impossible places. Vast, desolate landscapes with crimson skies, labyrinthine structures with walls that seemed to shift, and figures that appeared more like shadows than human beings. When she exhibited these works, the reactions were polarizing. Some called them visionary masterpieces, while others found them disturbing and unnerving. The success of her exhibitions did little to ease her restlessness. She felt as though she was constantly searching for something, though she could not name what it was. Then, one day, she received a letter that would set her on a new path, a path she had never expected to walk. The letter was from Dr. Lachance, who had remained in touch with her since she returned from the sanctuary. The letter was brief, but its contents were enough to stir the unease in her once more. "Emily, I hope you are well. I recently came across some documents that I believe may be of interest to you. It seems there are others who have encountered places like the sanctuary, other thresholds, as we might call them. There are references to these places in old texts, some of which suggest they are connected, part of a larger pattern. If you're willing, I think we should investigate this further. There is much still to understand." The letter spoke to something in Emily that she hadn't acknowledged before, a sense of unfinished business. The sanctuary was not the only place of its kind, and if there were other thresholds out there, then perhaps the entity she had banished was not entirely unique. The thought of discovering a larger network of these places, and of understanding how they were connected, fascinated her. She felt an irresistible pull to continue down this path, no matter where it might lead. Emily reached out to Dr. Lachance, and they arranged to meet in his study in Paris. When she arrived, she found him surrounded by stacks of books, old maps, and yellowed documents covered in handwritten notes. He greeted her with a mix of enthusiasm and caution. "It's good to see you," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I didn't know if you'd be interested in pursuing this, considering what you've already been through." Emily sat down and looked around at the collected materials. "I think I need to understand more," she said quietly. The sanctuary was just one piece of a larger puzzle, wasn't it? Dr. Lachance nodded, his expression serious. "I believe so. The more I've dug into this, the more I've come across references to places like the sanctuary, thresholds that appear in different cultures and different points in history. They're often linked to stories of disappearances, strange phenomena, or encounters with beings that defy explanation. What's curious is that the descriptions of these places share certain commonalities. He pulled out an old map and spread it across the table. It was covered in small markings, each one indicating a location tied to mysterious legends or supernatural occurrences. I've marked sites that I believe could be potential thresholds, he explained. Some are famous, like the Bermuda Triangle or the Dragon's Triangle in the Pacific, while others are far more obscure, places that only appear in local folklore or have been forgotten over time. Emily studied the map, noting how the locations seemed scattered across the globe, with no obvious pattern. What connects these places? She asked. Is there any evidence they share the same kind of consciousness that the sanctuary had? That's what I'm hoping to find out, Dr. Lachance replied. There are hints in some ancient texts, references to a network of crossings and a veiled path that links these places together. It's as if there's some kind of structure or system behind them, a network of gateways that can open under the right conditions. And in certain cases, it seems these places exert a kind of pull, drawing people towards them. The idea of a network of thresholds intrigued Emily, but it also filled her with a sense of unease. If there were more places like the sanctuary, each with its own ancient consciousness or liminal entity, then it was possible that Hespero was just one of many, and that others could be even more dangerous. Dr. Lachance continued, one particular site has come up in my research more frequently than the others. It's a place in Central Asia, near the border of Kazakhstan and Russia, known locally as the Silent Steppe. There are legends about it going back centuries, stories of travelers who vanish without a trace, strange lights in the sky, and voices carried on the wind. It's said to be an ancient place, one that predates even the oldest human settlements in the region. The mention of the Silent Steppe stirred something within Emily, a feeling of recognition that she could not place. Are there any accounts of people who went there and returned? She asked. Very few, Dr. Lachance replied, and those who did return spoke of an overwhelming sense of disorientation, as if time and space had become unmoored. Some reported hearing whispers in a language they couldn't understand, while others described seeing figures in the distance that seemed to disappear when approached. It bears some resemblance to the experiences described in LaSalle's journal. Emily felt a shiver run through her. The thought of traveling to the Silent Steppe both terrified and fascinated her. There was a part of her that wanted to walk away, to leave all of this behind and finally find peace. But she knew that if she did not confront the questions that still lingered in her mind, she would never truly be free. Then that's where we should start, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. If there are other thresholds, other places where the world doesn't follow the rules, then I want to understand them. I want to know why they exist, and if there's a way to close them. Dr. Lachance gave a slow nod. I'll make the arrangements. But understand, Emily, this could be even more dangerous than the sanctuary. If we're right about the nature of these places, then we may be dealing with forces beyond anything we can predict. I know, she replied, but I've already faced the darkness once. Whatever lies ahead, I'm ready for it. A month later, Emily and Dr. Lachance found themselves standing at the edge of the Silent Steppe. The landscape stretched out before them, a vast expanse of grasslands and rolling hills under a sky that seemed too vast for this world. The air was eerily still, and as they ventured deeper into the steppe, a feeling of otherness began to settle over them, as though they had stepped into a place that existed outside the normal flow of time. As they walked, Emily thought she could hear faint whispers on the wind, words she couldn't quite make out. It reminded her of the sanctuary, of the sense of being watched by something unseen. The further they traveled, the more disoriented she felt, as though the ground itself was shifting beneath her feet. Then, as dusk fell, they came upon a circle of ancient standing stones, each one covered in faded symbols similar to those she had seen at the sanctuary. The air around the stones seemed to vibrate, and there was a feeling of immense pressure, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Dr. Lachance approached the stones cautiously, his voice barely a whisper. These markings, They're similar to what we saw in the journals. I think this could be the entrance to another threshold. Emily stepped forward, her pulse quickening. As she touched one of the stones, she felt a surge of energy, and the whispers on the wind grew louder, more distinct. She could understand them now. They were calling her name. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet seemed to give way, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. The world around her blurred, and for a moment, she saw something. A figure standing in the distance, watching her. It was dark and indistinct, but there was something familiar about it, as though it carried a part of the sanctuary's essence. Emily struggled to regain her composure, but as she rose to her feet, the figure vanished, and the whispers faded into silence. She looked back at Dr. Lachance, who was watching her with concern. "It's happening again," she said, her voice trembling. "Whatever this place is, it's connected to the sanctuary. There's something here, something that knows me." Dr. Lachance took a step closer. "Then we'll find out what it is," he said firmly. "We'll uncover the truth, whatever it may be." Emily nodded, though a deep sense of foreboding lingered in her heart. She had come seeking answers, but the more she learned, the more it felt as though she was walking deeper into a labyrinth with no clear exit. The silent step was only the beginning. There would be other thresholds to cross, other secrets to uncover, and perhaps even greater sacrifices to be made. But she would not turn back. The darkness had called her name, and she would follow it, until she found what lay on the other side, or until it consumed her. As the journey through the silent step unfolded, the landscape seemed to change subtly with each step Emily and Dr. Lachance took. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled over the terrain, as if the very earth held its breath in anticipation. The whispers that had called Emily's name faded in and out of her perception, and though she tried to ignore them, they seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if beckoning her toward something she could not yet comprehend. After days of searching, they reached the center of the steppe, where an ancient structure rose from the ground. A massive stone archway, covered in the same shifting symbols that Emily had seen at the sanctuary. The archway was partially collapsed, with broken stones scattered around it, and a strange mist hovered just beyond the threshold, obscuring whatever lay on the other side. Emily felt a familiar pull, a sensation that seemed to draw her closer to the archway, as if the place itself was alive and aware of her presence. Dr. Lachance, who had been studying the markings on the stones, turned to her with a look of concern. "This archway, it's not just an entrance, it's a nexus," he said quietly. "A point where multiple thresholds intersect. If we cross it, we may not find ourselves in any place we recognize." Emily took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We didn't come this far just to turn back. If this is where the truth lies, then I need to face it." With those words, she stepped forward, feeling a tingling sensation as she passed through the archway and into the mist. The world around her seemed to twist and fold, and for a moment, she felt as though she was falling into an endless void. When the sensation faded, she found herself standing in a place that defied description. A vast, shimmering landscape of swirling colors and shifting shapes. It was neither day nor night, and the sky seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence. Emily could feel the presence of something immense, something that seemed to permeate every part of this strange realm. The whispers were louder here, echoing all around her. As she moved forward, the landscape began to shift again, and she saw dark figures in the distance. Shadowy, indistinct forms that seemed to watch her as she approached. Dr. Lachance emerged from the mist behind her, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "This place, it's like a crossroads of realities," he murmured. "It's connected to the sanctuary and to other places like it. I think we're standing at the heart of whatever network of thresholds exists." Emily's pulse quickened as the shadowy figures began to move, slowly drawing closer to them. They did not seem hostile, but there was an aura of immense power about them, as if they were manifestations of the very essence of this realm. As one of the figures approached, Emily felt a jolt of recognition. It was not quite like the entity she had encountered at the sanctuary. Yet there was something familiar in the way it seemed to observe her, as though it knew her very thoughts. "Why have you come here?" a voice echoed in her mind. It was not like the voice of Hespero. It was more complex, layered, as if composed of many voices speaking as one. "You seek answers, but the cost is higher than you realize." Emily took a step forward, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "I came to understand. The sanctuary, the thresholds, whatever you are. I want to know why you exist and what you want from us." The figure seemed to shift, growing more defined. Its shape took on a humanoid form, but its features remained obscured, as though it was not meant to be fully seen. "We are the guardians of the crossings," it replied. "We are the keepers of the paths between worlds. There are places where reality is thin, where the barriers are weak. It is our role to maintain the balance, to watch over the thresholds." Dr. Lachance stepped closer, his voice filled with wonder. "Then why do these places draw people in? Why do they take from those who enter?" The figure's reply was calm, yet resonant with an ancient weight. "The crossings are not meant for the uninvited. Those who seek us do so of their own will, driven by desire, curiosity, or desperation. The thresholds do not take, they reflect what is within. To step through is to confront one's own nature, to face the truths that lie buried. Those who do not return are those who cannot face what they find." Emily felt a chill as the meaning behind the figure's words sank in. So the sanctuary, it wasn't just a place of power. It was a mirror. It showed me my own fears, my own weaknesses. She looked down, her voice faltering. "And it took my father because he sacrificed himself to save me." The figure did not answer immediately. It seemed to consider her words, as though evaluating the depth of her understanding. "Your father made his choice as you have made yours. But the crossings are not without mercy. For those who are willing to let go, there is always a way to be free." Emily's heart tightened. "And if I choose to let go, will my father be at peace?" The figure's form began to dissolve, fading back into the swirling colors. "He is already free," the voice said, growing distant. "It is you who must find peace." As the last of the words echoed away, the mist began to dissipate, and the strange landscape slowly gave way to the familiar surroundings of the silent step. Emily found herself standing once more before the ancient archway, with Dr. Lachance beside her. The oppressive weight she had felt for so long was gone, and though there was still a sadness within her, it felt lighter, more bearable. She knew now that the sanctuary and the other thresholds were not just places of danger. They were places where the boundaries of reality blurred, where the soul's deepest truths could be confronted. Her journey had shown her that the cost of crossing these thresholds was the willingness to face what lay within oneself, to let go of the past, and to accept the unknown. Emily turned to Dr. Lachance, her eyes clear and calm. "I think I understand now," she said softly. "The thresholds, they aren't meant to be conquered or destroyed. They are tests. They exist to challenge those who are willing to step into the darkness and find their way back." Dr. Lachance nodded slowly. "And now that you've faced it, what will you do?" Emily looked out over the vast, open steppe, feeling the cool wind against her face. "I'll live," she said. "I'll move forward, knowing that my father's sacrifice wasn't in vain. He found freedom for himself and for me, and I owe it to him and to myself to embrace the life that I still have." With that, she and Dr. Lachance left the silent step behind, carrying with them the knowledge of what lay beyond the threshold. Emily felt as though a long, dark chapter had finally come to an end, and as she walked away from that ancient archway, she knew that she would no longer be haunted by the shadows of the past. The darkness had called her name, and she had answered it. Now, at last, she could let go. As she did, a quiet peace settled within her, like the calm after a storm. For the first time in years, Emily felt truly, profoundly free.